Welcome to the first in this series of Retrofit webinars. Today I'm delighted to have Adam Whitworth from People Power Retrofit, the supply chain manager, here to talk to us about the retrofit journey for householders. I'm particularly grateful to Adam, who's kindly agreed to stand in at a couple of hours' notice because our original presenter, Jonathan Atkinson, has COVID and he's not well enough to do the presentation. I'm Tina Holt, project manager for Retrofit on the CAFS Energy team, and I'm going to speak for just a couple of minutes, and then Adam will talk to us for about 40 minutes on Retrofit Journey for householders. Then we'll have 30 minutes for a Q&A, and then in the last 10 minutes, a poll, talk about some next events, and finish on time at 7:30. So for those of you who don't know much about Cumbria Action Sustainability or CAFS already, there are a few pictures of the kind of things that we do. So we're not just about energy in homes. We've got community projects. We bring people together to do all sorts of different things, including electric vehicle charging points or putting on clean energy. That's a nice picture of the roof at Burnieside. We work with different groups of people, from schools and young people through to different smaller and larger communities and the business community. So lots of different work there that we do, and we help hundreds of people with all kinds of different projects. On the energy services side, on the free side, we've got our Call to Cosy Homes Cumbria, which is a free energy advice call for people who are eligible. We also can do a free short advice call for anyone at all who's got a question on one item, something like solar panels or cavity wall insulation, whatever it happens to be, or a free 30-minute retrofit consultation by phone. That's also something that we can offer for those of you who perhaps haven't had one already. On our paid services side, we run an energy audit service. We call it Home Retrofit Planner. And it's basically the same one that is used in Manchester by People Powered Retrofit. And we create a whole house plan with that. We can also do thermal imaging and other kinds of energy advice. And then the other thing that we do in the energy team are our courses and webinars, both free and paid for. And this one today is free because it's funded by Energy Redress. But we're really grateful to those of you who've made donations, because that means that our work, we can go do more and go further with what we've got. So a big thank you to you. Before we start, I'd like to start the first poll. It's just a very short 1-question poll. So I'm going to launch it now. And this is just to get an idea of what everyone's level of knowledge is before we start. And when you finish the poll, you can, if you like, have a quick look at our brand new Facebook page for Cumbria Green Build, and that's something we hope to develop, where we can form a community, and those people who are interested in retrofit and want to talk to other householders or others with expertise on retrofit can all get on the Facebook page and talk to each other. So if you're interested, if you like to use Facebook and you're interested, then by all means look at that link there, and you can look at that later. I'm going to end the poll now. I think what we've got is, I'll show you the results. Quite a lot of people with a modest amount of knowledge or a medium amount of knowledge, a few quite well informed, and a few people still quite new to this. So we've got a wide range of you all involved on this webinar, which is brilliant to see. So jump on to the next. So Adam, who's the supply chain manager for People Powered Retrofit. Adam, I think I'm going to have to let you introduce yourself a little bit, because I've got a lot of information on Jonathan, but perhaps if you want to just say a couple of words, and also I'll stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours and get started. So I'll stop that.
Thank you very much, Tina. That's great. It's lovely to be here. I am, as I said, the supply chain manager for People Powered Retrofit in Manchester. I'm quite new in post myself. I've been there since November. Really excited. I've been studying at CAT in recent years, which is where I first started learning about retrofit. So I'm really delighted to be now working in retrofit, and it's a really exciting time to be getting into it, as there's so much talk about it now in the papers and so on, so much interest in it, and we're finding that there is a huge amount of interest coming to us through new inquiries and so on, which is great. And of course, it's lovely to have so many people giving up their evening to come and listen to people talk about retrofit. So it's really exciting time. So yeah, really pleased to be here. This is my first time doing a presentation like this, so be gentle with me. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you all find it useful. So without further ado, I will share my screen and we can get going, hopefully. Have you got that?
Yes.
Got that, brilliant. Okay, so this evening we're going to talk about the retrofit journey. So some of it might be basic for some of you that have got more in-depth knowledge of construction. Hopefully you'll find it interesting either way, even if you've got prior knowledge. So we're going to break it down into stages that you might need to consider for retrofit. Unfortunately, you can't just pick up the phone and ring and ask for a retrofit, someone to come and retrofit your house. Obviously, it's a very complex process. It can be a very expensive process depending on the depth and the range of measures that you're planning to take. There are risks involved, things can go wrong, and it is effectively just another construction job. So the processes and the stages that we will talk about today are really quite familiar to anyone that's been involved in construction works, large or small. So if you, for example, if you want to get your living room replastered, there are stages you'd need to go through even for a small job like that. You'd need to, you might see that the walls are looking a bit tired and think it's time for a refresh. You'd need to then make a bit of a plan, investigate the details and look at the state of the plaster and the alcoves and any complications. You'd then need to talk to a contractor. They would do some thinking, come up with a plan, then the work gets done, and then afterwards you'll probably have a debrief with the contractor. They'll tell you when you can paint it and when you can use the room and so on. In simple terms, that's the process is very similar, whether you're building an extension or whether you're retrofitting your house. You know, it all starts with sort of planning it and going through the stages. So what we're going to be talking about is loosely sort of based on the stages that you might see for any other job. So in the REBA plan of works, which is that circle on the left, and on the right we've got the PAS 2035 retrofit standard, which is the British standard, which is recently come into play for retrofits. So our plan and our stages are broadly aligned with those stages. So first one, before you make any decisions, it's worth having a think, getting a bit of advice at the outset. You need to assess the pros and cons of the work. Do you want to do it all at once? Do you want to take a phased approach? And it's just get as many ideas and as much knowledge as you can so you can try and make the right decisions for your property. So what is a retrofit? Well, I mean, in its broadest sense, a retrofit is something that is retrospectively fitted. So in a building, that could be a skylight being put in the roof. It could be a new boiler. It could be anything that's fitted after the building's already constructed. But in the context that we're discussing, that would be an eco retrofit or a green retrofit. So that might be installation of insulation. It could be a new energy efficient heating system, some smart technology to turn things on and off to make your usage more efficient, some solar panels, or anything else that might be designed or intended to reduce the impact of your home, to make it more healthy to live in, more comfortable, warmer, cozier. think I've just jumped ahead one, have I? No. So first step, retrofit brief. In essence, you need to think about your motivations for the retrofit. Why do you want to do this work? What are your priorities? What are your timescales? Do you want to do it all in one go? Do you want to do it in stages? Do you have a deadline that you need to meet? And of course, how will you fund it? And we have a template. Actually, I'm sure you'll be able to get this in the slides that are shared afterwards. But we have a template that we can run through, and so it takes the basic details, usage details of your house, health conditions. If anyone's asthmatic, that might impact on your priorities. Dates that you might want to get started, logistics, all these sort of things that really need careful thinking about at the outset. All the sort of physical details of your property, existing work that's been done, other structural issues, anything that's relevant to the job. Oh, hang on, how do I get rid of that now? Sorry, I've just lost my slides. Sorry, forgive me, I've just somehow managed to lose my presentation.
Well, what shall I just pop mine up while you sort that out, because we've actually had a question, and I think I might just take that question.
You take that. You take over for a second. I'll stop sharing for 1 second. I'll just
okay. So yeah. So we've had a question. Are the services provided by CAFs aligned to PAS 2035? And so the answer is that sort of in spirit we are following, or the home retrofit planner, for example, does a lot of things that the PAS 2035 is intended to do in terms of the initial stages, the assessment, and the whole house plan, and so on. And then the services that Carbon Co-op, for example, already have up and running, again, are broadly speaking aligned with PAS 2035. So you'll hear them talk about Path A, Path B, and Path C. So that's the same as PAS 2035. And then the services that CAFs will be developing will be, again, along those similar lines, but what we won't be doing from the very beginning is being accredited to do PAS 2035 work. So we're not looking to take on or to be involved in eco-funded work or something like that, where we've got to have a whole team, or where everything must be done to the letter with the PAS 2035 approach. But our approach is basically very much aligned with PAS 2035 in the way that it works. I hope that's answered the question, but do feel free to come back to us later at the end of the presentation. How's it going, Adam? Has it come back?
Great. For some reason my Chrome just decided to shut down, so I'm not quite sure why. So I'm not going to open any more links, and you can explore for yourselves when you get the presentation. But
okay, that's fine.
I'm not quite sure why I did that. But anyway, we're back. So I'll share my screen.
Don't worry. Yes.
Okay, have we got that?
That's great. Yeah.
Okay, super. So yeah, at the brief, this is really important to start getting your ideas in order and working out what you want from it. So another very important aspect at the beginning, of course, is to baseline what's going on in your home. So depending on your priorities for the retrofit, it might be that you want to reduce your carbon emissions and your bills. So you need to start getting a real good idea of what's going on in your house at the moment. So get as much data as you can and start tracking and baselining your energy use. It might be that your motivations are more sort of qualitative, and there's a certain room in your house that people don't like to be in, or just doesn't have a good feel about it. If there's something qualitative, start thinking about what it is you don't like and what you want to achieve. Or it might be sort of health and comfort reasons. Whatever it is, start thinking about your motivations, and then you can, at the end of the project, you can then sort of measure success in a meaningful way. So there are quite a few people involved in potentially involved in a retrofit project. Depending on the scope and scale of the project, some or all of these will be required, but they won't all be required in all cases. So it would usually start with a retrofit advisor, which might be CAFs, or it might be People Powered Retrofit around Manchester, and a retrofit assessor. So you would need someone in order to work out what can be done to your house, what sort of might be achievable. Designer, of course, that might be an architect, surveyor, structural engineers, and someone to coordinate the work. In the past 2035, the Retrofit Coordinator is one of the key roles. That could also be done by, for example, a clerk of works, is a more traditional, well-known sort of building role. So yeah, quantity surveyor, mechanical and systems, electrical systems engineer. There could be a whole range of people, and this is the time to start thinking about that as well, and who you might need. So now you've got your brief, it's time to create a plan. So everything you've outlined about your motivations, priorities, your plans, your budget, your timescales, that will all help to tailor this plan to you and your home. So the first step is assessing your home. I'm going to come back to that thought actually. So yeah, whole house plan. What's the level of comfort in your home currently? Is it very cold, drafty, and where would you ideally want it to be? Very important to think about the ventilation and air quality, particularly if you're sealing up lots of drafts in a traditional home. They were quite often built to, they needed a draft to bring fresh air into the house, and of course old houses traditionally with chimneys and leaky windows, there's plenty of ventilation, but it's uncontrolled. So it's really important to think about how you're going to replace that if you seal up the drafts, to make sure you're maintaining your air quality and not introducing moisture risks. Maintenance, is there anything that you need to be looking at before you start the retrofit? Is there anything that needs fixing, updating? Get that done before you start retrofitting. Aesthetics, it could be that you've got some really interesting plasterwork, cornicing, or something inside your home, or other features, or something on the exterior of your home. Is there anything that you are really not willing to lose, or do you, that's important to think about as well, because it might limit options that are available to you. History and heritage, it could be that you're in a conservation area, you might have a listing on your property. Again, that will really affect what you can do. And lastly, also think about your appliances. Energy use of appliances is something to consider as well. And I will just say it's important to think of the whole house plan. It's really referring to, you have to think of your house as a system, and all the different things you might do will interact with each other. So the heating system and the various insulations and the ventilation and air quality, it all works as a system. So you can't just sort of update one thing. There might be unintended consequences for single measure stuff if you don't think about how they interact. So systems thinking. We advocate a fabric first approach. So the key concept to think about in that is that you want to reduce your demand, your space heating demand, before you're moving on to other aspects. So fabric first, stop that heat leaking out through the windows, through the walls, through the floors, before you start thinking about putting in more energy efficient equipment and so on. And the very last thing in this chart is energy from renewables. So if you're thinking about solar panels or anything like that, that's the last thing to think about really. Once you've got your fabric into an efficient state, and once you've upgraded your heating system, then think about possibly renewables as a last part of your works. So the benefits of the fabric first approach, it's about making your house easier to keep warm and healthy. So instead of just pumping more and more heat in, once it's in, if you've got a efficient fabric, you're keeping it in instead of having to sort of keep replenishing that heat all the time. So assessment. Number of different ways you could assess your house. EPCs, all houses have an EPC when they're built or sold. We wouldn't recommend that you put too much faith in an EPC or use it as a basis for a retrofit. They can be quite inaccurate. They tend to be a bit of a box ticking exercise, and the people that carry out the EPC surveys aren't always hugely qualified. So yeah, we'd avoid that where possible. You might have a bit more of a detailed survey, either from a general surveyor or a specialist retrofit surveyor. And as Tina mentioned, the home retrofit planner is our tool that we use. That's based on the full SAP model, but it uses different assumptions and it goes into a lot more detail. And we find that works really well for us. And also just worth saying that the more detail and the more quantitative the assessment at the beginning, the better and the more accurate the results, and the better the basis for the retrofit, really. So once you've got your assessment done, you need to be looking at that and thinking, what is practical for us? What exactly do we want to do? It might be that, for example, in our home retrofit planner, we tend to do 3 scenarios. So there might be a sort of a low-hanging fruit, or scenario 1, 2, and 3, which will be different levels of retrofit. So scenario 3 might be a real whole house deep retrofit, which we'd all love to do, but it might be that costs an awful lot of money. So you might want to do scenario 1 or 2 and just sort of pare back what you're planning. So this is the point really to start thinking, what is sensible for us? What is practical for our property? You might feel confident to think about those decisions yourself, or it might be time again to talk to an expert, perhaps CAFS or PPR, or someone else that's involved in the industry and can give you some sensible advice. So the scope of works will comprise a few different bits of information. Importantly, it needs to detail the key risks. As I mentioned before, the interaction between, introducing a retrofit measure can potentially have unintended consequences. So those risks need to be thought of and sort of written down and mentioned in the scope of works. How different measures interact with each other, really, really important to think about. Any preparatory work, for example, if you've got a damp patch on the wall, that needs to be sorted before your new wall insulation is installed. And any other design requirements, for example, the heritage stuff we mentioned before, if you want to keep your ornate cornicing and coving or whatever, any design requirements, that's useful to get them in at this point. And also it will highlight perhaps if you need to get planning permission, if there are anything that's been brought up in the retrofit assessment. For example, we mentioned damp. It might be that you need to get specialist surveyor or investigation done to fully understand what's going on before you move forward from this stage. Are there any other? Is it a good time to see if there are any other questions, Tina, for the moment, or before we move on to the next stage?
Yes, I've got a couple. Some of them are coming in on the chat, so I'm trying to follow those, which is trickier. If you put them in the Q&A, it's actually easier for me to see them. So I've got a few questions now. I'll ask them in this order. So someone said, if I wanted to find a retrofit planner or assessor, what should I search for? And I suppose that depends where you are, because you at People Powered Retrofit have retrofit planners and assessors. Here at CAFS, we have retrofit assessors. They're not necessarily using PAS 2035 per se, although some of ours are qualified. But we both, People Powered Retrofit in the Manchester area and CAFS in Cumbria, have the people who are doing these assessments, which was what I referred to in the previous slides about our energy services at CAFS. So Perhaps start by talking to us. That's an option. Otherwise, it's a Google search, I think, to find people locally.
Yeah, we get inquiries from all over the country. Sadly, we have limited resource, and we have to turn a lot of people away that are outside of our area. There are organisations doing similar things, and we're part of what we're doing at PPR is trying to sort of connect those organisations. But it's a part of the construction industry that's still, relatively speaking, in its infancy. But there are more contractors coming through that know about retrofit. There are more organisations like ourselves and CAFs that are trying to coordinate work. So yeah, the Google search, but just be a bit careful to make sure you satisfy yourself. So you're happy that you're talking to someone who knows what they're talking about.
Yes, I mean, if you're fortunate enough to live in the Manchester area, then People Powered Retrofit has a sort of good end-to-end service, and we're looking to build something very similar here in Cumbria. At the moment, we've got the survey side of things. So someone's asked, how much does a survey cost to establish what the options are? Well, our surveys start at £600 up to, well, for a larger house, perhaps £1,000. And that's really in-depth service. And that's what the Home Retrofit Planner is. And we use that here in Cumbria exactly the same as, it's the same software that you use in
Yep.
Manchester, because we're coordinated on that. So in between Manchester and Cumbria, and I think the area in between, we've got some resource, and we've got the people who can do that.
Yeah.
Someone's asked, what is a SAP model? And what's an EPC? So it'd probably be really good to just mention what those are for anyone who's not come across those terms before.
Yeah, the SAP stands for Standard Assessment Protocol, I think, and it's the sort of I think the SAP is used to develop the basic SAP tool. I think is used to develop the EPCs that you would use for buying and selling houses and so on. They're sort of lower level energy assessment tools that are sort of widely used. So our Home Retrofit Planner, as I mentioned, is based upon SAP, but it goes into a lot more detail and uses very different assumptions to some of the ones that are used in SAP. But the EPC is the certificate that you would get if you were to look at an estate agent and wanted to buy a house. Then that EPC, Energy Performance Certificate, I think it stands for. So that's that piece of that says your house is an A, a B, a D, a C. So yeah, I hope that's answered that.
Okay. Do you want to carry on a bit then? We have got a lot more questions, but I think I might save some of them for the end, because once you've got to the end, you may have answered some of the questions that have come in.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. So we've got our plan of the retrofit improvements that we want to make to the home. We can't just sort of hand this over to a builder and ask them to crack on. So now we might need to get some help from consultants, designers, engineers. Might be you want to contact suppliers, contractors, and start getting advice from people that really know what they're doing. It will depend again on the nature and the complexity of the job that you're planning to do, who you need to talk to. But this is the time to really get any detailed technical design done, and that will then feed into a schedule of works that you can give out to a builder, contractor. So design work, if you are just doing a relatively simple task, for example, installing solar panels or single measure, it might be that you can just give that to a contractor, and you'll give them you'll tell them what you want to achieve, and then it's down to them to sort of design that system. And it would be typically they'll be following manufacturer's design specifications. It wouldn't be a bespoke design, and obviously if you haven't got lots of professionals, it's a slightly cheaper way of doing it, but it's not necessarily appropriate for more complex work. So quite often retrofits, they will require design approach. So yeah, interaction between different materials. They'll need architects or someone else to draw up how those how those measures will interact to make sure you're not introducing thermal bridges into it, into the building, or any other potential problems. There might be planning requirements for certain measures. You'll need an architect or, well, yes, an architect to get you plans that you can submit for planning permission. And of course, with all this professional advice, that this is a slightly more expensive way to do things. So in the design work, there are two aspects really. There's the high level design to secure the planning permission. So that might be drawings of your whole house, where it sits next to other houses, potentially if you want to semi-detached or something. It'll set it out to the planning authorities, what the existing property is, and then what you plan to do. It might be that you're doing external wall insulation or doing something that requires you to get permission. And then the next phase is the detailed technical design, which is, as I mentioned before, it might be where the floor meets the wall, and just making sure that the detail is there, so that when you have got the contractor on site, he knows exactly what to do to make sure that he's going to produce a satisfactory retrofit that does what you're intending. And out of this design process, you should end up with a schedule of works, which will be a detailed document that will outline everything that your contractor needs to know, so that when you give that to them, they come around, have a look, they understand exactly what the specification is of what they're required to do, and they can then price that effectively and accurately. And the other important thing that will come out of this process is a performance risk register. So as I mentioned a couple of times, if you can have unintended consequences with certain aspects of retrofit, such as moisture is the big one, introducing moisture, or reduced air quality. These risks need to be identified, they need to be logged, they need to be mitigated. So the most important part is, once you've identified them, once you've logged them, you can then sort of make a plan to reduce the probability of that risk being a problem. And crucially, you need to allocate that to an owner, so that somebody on site is responsible for mitigating that risk and ensuring to the best of their ability that it doesn't cause you a problem. Procurement can be difficult finding contractors. Builders and many contractors are all very, very busy at the moment, but there are a couple of different ways to do it. If it's a big job, you might have a main contractor. So they'll coordinate the work. You'll just have a contract with them, and they will then subcontract out various jobs to specialists, for example, mechanical heating engineers, or it might be that they get someone else to do the external wall insulation, or whatever it might be. But crucially, the lead and the main contractor will coordinate that job, and you'll have one point of contact really if you need to get something resolved. The other option is if you have multiple contractors for the various different elements of the job. But something really important to think about there is that you'll need to work out who's coordinating it. So you'll need to get certain trades in at certain times, and if you're coordinating that yourself, you've got to make sure you're comfortable to do that, and also then making sure you know whose responsibility ends where. If there are different contractors responsible for different aspects, that interaction between the measures is really important. As I've mentioned a couple of times, just making sure you know who's responsible for what and where that responsibility starts and finishes. There are lots of different types and sizes of contractors: sole traders, SMEs, family firms, large contractors. It'll probably depend partly on the nature of the job. It'll also depend on who's in your area and who you can get. So we recommend, as a minimum, get 3 quotes, and and then you'll have to just see what you can find in the local market, as it were, and who you can get to come and do it. But there are questions: are they appropriate for the job? Have they got experience with retrofit? Or if not, have you got some way of mitigating that? Have you got a retrofit coordinator or someone that can guide them through any parts of the process that they're not familiar with? And it might be worth asking about training, accreditations, references for other jobs that they've done, checking that previous customers are happy and so on, reputation of the builder. Really important to start, get a bit of a handle on who they are, because you'll probably be working with them for some months on this, and it can be quite a stressful process getting this work done. So you want to make sure you've got the right contractor for you as far as you can. And very important to have a contract in place, so everyone knows where they stand, and in the event of anything going wrong with the job, you know whose responsibility it is to do what. So really important to get this nailed down at the beginning and in the contract. I have got some links on here, but because my Chrome shut down last time I tried to go back from the links, I'm not going to open them, but I think these will be shared, so please do have a look. We've got a comparison chart here, which will give you a sense of 3 different widely available contracts. The JCT contract is an off-the-shelf construction contract. There's one available through the Federation of Master Builders, if the contractor you're working with is a member of the FMB. And there's also one from the REBA, which is the Royal British Royal something Institute. British Architect Institute. I couldn't think of the I. Institute of British Architects. So yes, so there are 3 sort of off-the-shelf contracts, and we've got this bit of a comparison chart here, which you'll be able to have a bit of a click through and have a look at. And we also we did a webinar with a lady called Sarah Fox, who's a lawyer. She is a contracts expert, construction contracts expert. So we've got a webinar as well that you'll be able to click through and watch if you get to that stage, which will hopefully help you to work your way through that process.
And I'll just chip in, because that webinar has gone live on our events, the CAFS events page today. So that's in April, I think, or is it May? May. It's in May.
Well, the one on here is a previous one that she did for us in 2020.
Oh, okay, brilliant. So people can
that's great. I wasn't aware of that. That's great if she's doing that. That's great.
Yeah, so I think nice to watch the one that's a recorded one, and then if you've got questions, you can come along to the live one later.
Yeah. So next step, on site, you've got your contractor appointed, work starting. Really important at this stage to think about quality assurance, how you're going to monitor and assess the standard of work that's being carried out. So it's important to be really upfront and clear with your contractor. You need to have reasonable expectations and ensure they're aware of your expectations, regular communication, and a strong framework for oversight. These are sort of key ingredients of quality assurance. So part of that QA process, in past 2035, one of the key roles is the Retrofit Coordinator, and they'd be very much involved with the QA side of things. They would likely propose a quality framework, perhaps a checklist, to make sure everything's being done in the right stages, nothing's being missed out. Really important to make sure anything that's mechanical, electrical is properly commissioned by appropriate qualified installers. Inductions, this is an important part, because retrofit is relatively a new part of the construction industry. There are lots of people who work in construction but aren't quite as familiar with the level of quality assurance and the sort of detail that's required in successful retrofit, because it really is so important to get the detail right. Otherwise, if you've got, if you put a triple glazed window in but it's not quality assured and there's a gap, somewhere around the edge of the window fitting, then it's undermining the value of that window. It's not. You have to get it right, and so it's important to have inductions on site. So we offer toolbox talks to contractors that aren't quite as familiar with the work. So if there's a stage of the work that they're not comfortable with, we can send someone down who knows about it, and we'll get them to talk on site, talk it over with the contractors, just to really get so much. We need to make sure that everyone who's working there has got an understanding of what you're trying to achieve and what's required to make sure that you do achieve it. And part of that, the retrofit coordinator will visit the site fairly regularly and timed for specific points in the construction. So perhaps, before, once it's been, the air tightness layer has been put in, the retrofit coordinator will probably want to go and have a look and make sure that that's, they're satisfied with the standard and the quality. Because once the plaster goes on, or the finishes go on, it's all hidden away and it's hard to then see. Which ties into the next part, regular photos. We've all got phones in our pockets, take loads of photos. Then if there are queries later on, again, it's something to refer back to. And yeah, it's worth putting at the beginning requirements for photos, checklists and commissioning into the contract, just so everyone's aware at the get-go, and it's not a surprise to the builder, because one of the things that we've encountered is that some builders are a little bit hesitant to do retrofit work because of the greatly increased sort of need for quality assurance and so on in retrofit. So it's important that they're aware of that at the beginning and make sure that that's in the contract. And the last phase is handover and evaluation. So retrofit work's coming to an end. You should receive a handover pack from your contractor. User manuals for anything that's been installed. Anything you need to operate, any equipment in the house should be clearly labelled. Maintenance plans and requirements for anything that's gone in. Copies of any warranties and guarantees, and of course building control certificate if you've had notifiable works completed as part of the job. And crucially as well, this is the question now: have you achieved your aims? So go back to your project brief, have a look at those goals you set in the beginning. What was it that motivated you to get the work done, and how does your outcome compare with your intended outcome? So was it to improve the comfort in the building? Has it worked? Are you feeling more comfortable? You might have temperature and humidity readings if you when you were baselining, if you installed something to measure that. So you can really have a look and see what's important to you. Is your home feeling more cozy and warm? And crucially, of course, are you using less energy? And are your bills reduced? And yeah, just a last point, I've already said really, but circling back to the very beginning, baselining. It's really important to do that at the beginning, so you can really look back when you get to the end of the process, and you can see what's gone on, and what difference the retrofit has made, what's the value of the retrofit. So yeah, thank you very much. That is the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Adam. That's been really great and really interesting.